For most of us, our phones have become our main way to capture memories in our everyday lives. But things weren't always like this. If there ever was a single feature that reflected the evolution of our mobile devices over the years, it would be the camera setup. What used to be a novelty or even a luxury is now a standard feature for every phone. It took years of development and innovation to build up to what we now take for granted with our smartphone cameras. I'm Will for GSM Arena, and let's have a look at this journey together and see how far we've come. Our story starts in 1999 with Kyocera's VP-210. The VP-210 was one of the forefathers of the modern camera phone. It was released in Japan and promoted as the visual phone. It had a single 0.11 megapixel front-facing camera and could send 2 photos per second via Japan's PHS mobile network system. There was enough memory capacity to hold just 20 JPEG photographs. In 2000, Samsung came in with its SCH V200. This South Korean phone had to be hooked up to a computer to get your photos, and the camera and the phone components were essentially separate devices housed in the same body. In 2001, Nokia joined in on the fun with its 7650. The 7650 was a prohibitively expensive phone, and you could hardly send the photos to anyone who didn't have the same phone. Not to mention, nobody had mobile data back then, so you could only rely on MMS. Nevertheless, that sounded the start of the camera phone race. By 2003, more camera phones had already been sold worldwide than standalone digital cameras, over 80 million units. It was largely due to the growth of the Japan and Korea markets. Image quality was rising, prices were dropping, and business was booming. Also in 2003, clamshell phones began to appear, like Samsung's E700. The E700 brought that clamshell form factor with an external display on the front. You could use the main camera for selfies, not unlike today's flip phones. In the first 9 months of 2004, more than half of the phones sold worldwide had cameras in them, and leading the way was Nokia. In 2005, Nokia's N90 took things to the next level. Its 2-megapixel camera boasted Carl Zeiss optics, autofocus, and an LED flash. In addition, it featured a rotating screen, which gave it a camcorder feel, and a new focus on video as opposed to photos. And in 2006, Sony Ericsson released the K800i. Sony Ericsson was Nokia's main competitor, and its K800i had a higher res 3.2 megapixel camera with autofocus and a xenon flash. Also in 2006, Nokia retaliated with the N73. The Nokia N73 also featured a 3.2 megapixel autofocus camera. It had a front camera too, plus multimedia features like a large display and stereo speakers. The N73 became one of the top-selling N-series devices. 2006 was also when we got Nokia's N93. The N93 was focused on video recording. It was the first phone to record DVD quality video, that is, VGA resolution video at a full 30 frames per second. In these early years, the camera innovations were steady but modest, but as technology developed and camera phones gained traction, the changes would grow in magnitude. On to 2007, when Samsung and others came out with 5-megapixel camera phones. The megapixel count was rising, and one of the first 5-megapixel camera phones was Samsung's G800. But that same year, the camera phone to prove really popular was Nokia's N95. It had a 5-megapixel camera with a Carl Zeiss lens, and it could record video at 30 frames per second. And in fact, 5 megapixels remained as a high-end standard for several years. Also, fun fact, the Nokia N95's Maps and SatNav demo video was one of the first clips we published on our YouTube channel all those years ago. At that point in time, Nokia was at its best, but then that same year, Apple blindsided everyone by releasing a radical new device, the first iPhone. The iPhone didn't really focus much on camera quality, so other manufacturers continued to pursue more camera advancements in a push to remain competitive. This includes LG with its KU990 Viewty in 2007. The Viewty was another 5-megapixel camera phone and the first phone to record slow-mo video. It captured 120 FPS footage at QVGA resolution, which could be slowed down 4 times. 2008 came along, and so did Samsung's i8510 Innovate. The megapixel race was still on, and Samsung's Innovate had the first 8-megapixel camera to hit the market. But chunky designs like this one were beginning to fall out of favor with the public. Also in 2008, we got LG's Renoir. The Renoir packed an 8-megapixel camera as well, but also had a true touchscreen. Camera phones were slowly becoming more like what we recognize today. The changes of the mobile world inevitably had an impact in other aspects of our daily life. 2008 was the same year in which Polaroid announced the discontinuation of all instant film products, citing the rise of digital imaging technology as the main culprit. 2009 brought another jump in megapixels with Samsung's Pixon 12. The Pixon 12 was the first globally available 12-megapixel camera phone, and others soon followed suit the same year. 12 megapixels solidified itself as the mainstream resolution for smartphones that's still used today. Then in 2010, Nokia upped the sensor size with its N8. The N8's 12-megapixel camera had an extra large sensor. The phone was unique looking, and it was the company's flagship device for the year. To highlight the capabilities of the Nokia N8, Nokia created a 7-minute short film shot entirely on the phone's 720p camera. And of course, we were happy to get our hands on it. 2011 brought new innovation when it comes to video, with LG's Optimus 2X. This was the first phone to be able to record 1080p videos, and many others followed suit. One of these was 2011's iPhone 4S. Its 8-megapixel iSight camera could also record 1080p videos, and it was one of the first phones that allowed users to automatically apply filters to their photos. In 2012, Nokia pushed the limits even further with the PureView 808. This was Nokia's first 41-megapixel camera phone. It also held the record for the largest phone image sensor ever for almost a decade, until the arrival of the Xiaomi Mi 11 Ultra. But the PureView 808 relied on Nokia's old Symbian smartphone OS, which was its ultimate shortcoming in the face of Apple's elegant and smooth UI. We went into detail about the PureView 808 in an episode of our Flashback series, and I'll leave a link for you to check it out. Also in 2012 was another innovative Nokia phone, the Lumia 920. The Lumia 920 had a much smaller image sensor than the PureView, but it was the first phone camera to implement optical image stabilization. OIS brought obvious advantages during video recording, but it also allowed the Lumia 920 to use slower shutter speed in low light conditions, without fearing that camera shake will ruin the photos. That, combined with the f2.0 aperture, led to class-leading low light performance. Then in 2013, we got the Samsung Galaxy Note 3. This was the first phone that could record 4K videos, and it recorded at 30 FPS, with the powerful Snapdragon 800 chipset keeping the frame rate steady. In 2014, the HTC One M8 brought dual cameras to the scene for the second time. We'd seen them before as a means for 3D capture, but that never caught on. The HTC One M8 used a secondary camera as a depth sensor, the same thing that many modern smartphone cameras do. In 2016, we got the first secondary ultra-wide cam on the LG G5. That year, LG's G5 and V20 featured cameras with ultra-wide lenses stretched out to 135 degrees. That's more than the 120 or so degrees we get on most ultra-wide cameras today. That's also the year that Apple's iPhone 7 Plus introduced a secondary telephoto zoom. With this 2x zoom lens, the iPhone 7 Plus made the dual cameras idea even more popular to the masses. And it was also the phone to debut a portrait mode feature. Smartphone telephoto cameras had continued to improve through the years, providing better zoom in a more compact package. Let's step back to 2013 with Samsung's Galaxy S4 Zoom. It had a single camera with a huge lens, which made the Galaxy S4 Zoom look more like a standalone digital camera. Anyway, it introduced the first 10x optical zoom on a smartphone. Periscope telephoto cameras are way more compact, but they never achieved widespread popularity, and they were put aside for years. But in 2019, the Huawei P30 Pro and Oppo Reno 5x zoom brought that back. These phones featured high-quality periscope cameras, a 4.63x optical zoom within the Huawei P30 Pro, and 5x magnification with the Oppo Reno 10x zoom. Then in 2021, Sony's Xperia 1 Mark III advanced the technology even further. The Xperia 1 Mark III had the first periscope telephoto camera with a variable focal length. It was able to switch between a 70mm and a 105mm equivalent zoom with a push of a button. 2022's Sony Xperia 1 Mark IV refined this even further. The Xperia 1 Mark IV featured a telephoto cam which could provide seamless optical zoom at any given step between 85 and 125 millimeters. And in 2023, the Xiaomi 13 Pro brought another innovation. This latest development was a telephoto camera with a floating lens. This allows the camera to focus from as close as 10 centimeters away, so you can take macro shots. Selfies are another important aspect of your smartphone camera experience, and manufacturers eventually found innovative ways of taking them. Back in 2013, Oppo came out with a radical idea with its Oppo N1. The Oppo N1 was the first flip camera phone. Its 13-megapixel autofocus camera was equipped on a manually rotating module. You could turn it around with your hand and then snap selfies with it. In 2014, the Oppo N3 followed up on the idea by making the rotating camera module motorized, a world's first. Then in 2017, the Meizu Pro 7 went a different direction. Presumably inspired by the old Samsung E700, it had a second screen on the back which could act as a viewfinder while you snapped selfies with the rear camera. That's something you see in the foldable phones of today. In 2018, Vivo's NEX S went for a different sort of innovation. The NEX S had a selfie camera which would hide within the phone's body and then pop up mechanically when you need to take a selfie. In 2019, the Samsung Galaxy A80 went back to the Oppo N3's formula, but this time around the flip was tied to a slide-out action. When you wanted to take a selfie, a platform on the back would rise while the main cam rotated to face you. Then in 2020, the ZTE Axon 25G started a new trend. This was the first ever smartphone to come out with an under-display selfie camera. These sorts of cameras don't take high-quality selfies, but at least the camera is hidden with no need for a pop-up, cutout, or notch. But maybe the most notable smartphone development is the innovation in sensor engineering. Back in 2016, image sensor innovations came from an unlikely source, Panasonic. Their phone, called the Lumix DMC CM1, featured the first 1-inch type sensor that was truly capable of having an impact on the photo and video quality of a phone. But before we got 1-inch type sensors in mainstream smartphones, sensor manufacturers got creative in overcoming small pixel inefficiencies by combining the signal of several of them into one. This happened in 2018. Huawei released its P20 Pro. Its 40-megapixel main camera was the first to feature a sensor with a quad Bayer filter. It binned pixels 4 into 1 to produce 10-megapixel images. The benefit of this pixel configuration was better capability for noise reduction and HDR processing. Then in 2019, the NonaCell sensor debuted in Xiaomi's Mi Note 10. Its 108-megapixel sensor was developed through cooperation between Samsung and Xiaomi, and it would bin 9 pixels into 1 to produce 12-megapixel images. This took the quad Bayer approach a step further to provide even better noise performance and HDR output. In 2022, large 1-inch type sensors went mainstream with Sony's IMX989, which debuted in the Xiaomi 12S Ultra. The 12S Ultra's large sensor could produce great image quality, as well as a natural defocus background behind a subject. And the IMX989 has featured in several high-end camera phones since then. And in 2023, Sony introduced the stacked image sensor within its Xperia 1 Mark V. The photodiodes and transistors are separated onto different layers instead of sitting one next to the other. This allows for larger photodiodes with much improved light gathering capability, and also better transistors, which reduces noise. So these sensors are able to rival 1-inchers in their image quality output. So there you have it, guys. Phone cameras have really come a long way. Now even your average phone is able to take decent photos and videos. And with the top flagships, you can create content even camera snobs can be proud of. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.